Welcome to your doom.
What up, guys?
It's Justin,
This is Otto.
and this is it. This is the prequel to the Welcome to Your Doom podcast.
That's right. That's right. We just wanted to take an episode to explain sort of the motivations behind doing this podcast, as like we didn't want to pigeonhole ourselves into one or two subjects. We kind of tend to have these kinds of conversations on our own when we're just hanging out. So we thought we would create a podcast that spans all of our interests, and that goes from comic books to novels to technology to film. But a lot of it is geek related, right? So it's a lot of it is comic book related. A lot of it is comic book movie related. I'm a big horror movie buff. I think you're gonna find that I tend to skew things towards the horror side. Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we sort of tell the audience what we're interested in or what we're into in terms of, like, what did we grow up with? Like, where do our interests lie? Justin, I'm going to let you kick that one off.
Yay! All right, now, for me growing up, athletics background, so basketball and stuff like that, but more related to the podcast as well.
Athletics.
Fuck off. That's not what we're talking about. I've got shit
This
to
is
say
a
about
nerd podcast.
Dude.
You can't talk about athletics.
I thought we're talking about my upbringing. I got excited.
My God. It all started when I was in kindergarten.
No, I think some of the biggest influences for me when I was growing up was obviously Batman. Batman '89 was probably the biggest movie I'd ever seen in terms of just getting me interested into stuff like that. Transformers, huge for me. Optimus Prime was my hero. Still is, kind of. And that was kind of my two really, really big things. It wasn't until, like, I had always been kind of a closet comic book guy for a long time, but wasn't really reading as much or collecting as much until I met you, Otto, in university. You
right.
kind of brought out the inner geek in me again. So, I mean, since then, I've been branching out to all kinds of different things. And I forgot, obviously, the X-Men comics in the early 90s were also, the X-Men comics, like the Jim Lee Claremont ones were big,
right.
And obviously the animated interpretation was also a big one. So those are some of the things I started with.
What about movies? Like,
movies
how did that?
In general?
Yeah, movies in general. What are you?
I mean, I'm pretty well versed. It wasn't until a little bit later in my life I started really appreciating horror movies. I was scared shitless of them when I was really young.
Oh, yeah.
The first one I'd ever seen was Halloween 4, The Curse of Michael Myers. And that motherfucker scared the shit out of me. That was the one where at the end of the movie,
The kid puts on the mask?
The kid puts on the mask
Yeah.
and is that there, and then what's his name? Donald Pleasance delivers this, goes, nah! It's just, he might as well have been, he was on a staircase. He might as well have just started gnawing on the banister the amount he was chewing that scene.
But it sounds like he was chewing on a banister.
He might as well have.
Sounds like he was chewing on something that didn't want to be eaten.
So yeah, that was kind of like, and I think that because of how deeply scared I was of that when I was like 12, like I was not a child, but anyways, it was
just a wussy.
Scared, yeah, I was a big wussy at that age. Yeah. So it scared me enough that, like, I don't know, I guess it made me also later in life appreciate the Halloween movies most.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that you are definitely a big Michael Myers fan.
He's my fave.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we did. Was it like 2 years? No, it was a year ago.
Last year, man.
No, wasn't
no,
last
2 years.
year.
It
was
2 years. 2 years.
It was 2 Halloweens ago that my brother came down and my wife was there as well. We just you had the mask, the really solid like latex Michael Myers mask, and we went out and did like a little horror shoot around my neighborhood, one of the residential streets. Lots of leaves strewn around the place. I was hoping to make a Halloween poster based on the photography that we did there. And I did sort of get somewhere with it, and I actually planned on doing something with it, but it's in the backlog with all the other crap. But it was a ton of fun to do, and actually the pictures turned out really, really good.
Yeah.
It turned out really well. My brother's a pretty good sort of amateur photographer. The black and white stuff there looked really good, and the Shape is one of those characters that just keeps coming back a lot, like Batman and all of these other all of these other sort of mythological modern myths, like Batman, Spider-Man, all these guys, all these characters, and have jumped through time. I can't think of another set of actual characters that have been written about consistently, new stories being created over the years, other than modern comic books. Like, I can't think of, like, you kind of compare it to stories told like verbally, like the oral history that's passed around, like the Greek mythology, the Egyptian mythology, those big ones that people like, the Norse mythology, all of that stuff. But new stories, I think what precludes them from this argument is that new stories aren't being written about those characters. They have classic stories that are told and retold and reinterpreted.
Interpreted?
Yeah.
That is not a word.
That's not. Reinterpreted.
There you go.
Over time, but the morals remain the same and the stories remain classic. The same argument can be said about the big modern comic players, but there's still new ongoing series, ongoing literature, new stuff being written about these characters, and that's what we find. That's what I find fascinating. It's like it's a modern day mythology, and it's been, I can't remember. I don't have my dates, but when was Superman created? 1938. Yeah, 1938. So since
I was literally just looking that up the other day.
Oh, really?
And I know it was Superman's 38, Batman was 39. I believe Wonder Woman was 42. I think.
Yeah, she's
42 or
is she 70 something? Oh shit, I don't know.
Yeah, she's in the 40s, early 40s. Is it 41 or 42?
Yeah.
Anyways, that's why it's fresh in my mind.
So that's sort of on the comic book. There's a little bit of movies in there. What about video games? I think we're big video game players, right? What do you like in your games?
I am a less social gamer, I find. I like playing like single player walkthroughs, or I'm not one like. So, for instance, like we're playing Injustice right now.
Yeah.
It's rare that I ever jump online. I just don't like getting bodied by people. I'd rather do the bodying until I get to the difficulty that's just too hard for me, and then fucking it's done.
I mostly agree. I mean, when I was growing up, video games were actually a big part of my life. So just jumping back to the comic books for a little bit, I grew up like pretty much a DC kid.
Yeah.
I had lots of DC comics. I collected Marvel as well, but it didn't resonate as much with me at the time. I think there are lots of Marvel stories that have stayed with me since then, but DC's mythological foundation was just connected with me on a level that Marvel just did not. Yeah. Marvel were more, I mean, frankly speaking, they were more mature stories. There were stories that I didn't appreciate when I was younger. But the Marvel, the X-Men animated series, obviously big for a lot of us kids. When you're born in the mid '80s, the animated series for X-Men was huge. Obviously, Batman the animated series was huge. Mm-hmm. But yeah, these characters were a big part of my life when I was growing up, and it was a weird time to be collecting comic books. I'll tell you, in the '90s, the '90s were the comic book bubble, so to speak, and with all the spinning rims on the covers and gold-plated foil
covers.
Yeah, foil-plated covers and bagged comic books and all of that.
I'm pretty sure
crazy.
X-Men Alpha or Omega had like
the foil. The foil.
It had like 8 or 9 variations.
Yeah, that was was that the Joe Mad cover? I think that was when Joe Mad drew Alpha, and that was Age of Apocalypse, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I remember that cover, and everybody wanted it so bad when we were younger. We collected Wizard. We would get Wizard magazine every week to see who the top 10 artists were, and if the comic book that you liked had the artist that was on the top 10 list. And it really was about the art. And that's when Image came and just absolutely crushed it, because they're their artists were sort of younger upstarts, so to speak, right? And you had this totally distinctive, non-corporate art style. When I say corporate, I mean like the big two, Marvel and DC. You had this whole other style that they brought to the table. None of us were thinking about writing. And now the whole situation is reversed. I actually, the art is important, but if the writing is strong, I think that I personally believe that you can get past the art.
Yes.
You can get past the art if it's in style that you don't like. So that's sort of where I'm coming from, comics wise. One of my favorite comic books is actually Marvel Story. It's I don't know if you've ever read this, but Ares miniseries. I think it was like maybe the late 90s or early 2000s, or maybe even 2003 maybe.
Okay.
Great trade paperback. The way Marvel captures Ares, and I think he joined the Avengers for a little bit. Like he's this crazy mohawk.
That Ares.
Yeah, he has this crazy mohawk on his head.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that book, man, that was amazing. I love that story, and I own it. I read it from time to time. Probably read it once a year.
Yeah.
Great book. But like obviously like the Ultimate series was pretty influential when I was reading it. But Kingdom Come is by far, like, if I was going to recommend anything to anyone, Kingdom Come is right up there. So we'll probably be talking about our favorite stories in another podcast, but just wanted to give it some color. In terms of video games huge when I was growing up. Nintendo was a big deal. Super Mario, Contra, Castlevania was a big deal. It was Nintendo, so it was Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, Dreamcast. I had a Dreamcast. I remember playing the Dreamcast, and
so many pirated games.
I can confirm.
Lie. Don't you dare lie.
Cannot confirm nor deny what Justin said was
we were all
accurate.
Young ones, young and unappreciative of the works of others, and we were old and appreciate it all.
But yeah, I love a good platformer. I'm a big Castlevania fan. And video games are a big deal, and I enjoy couch co-op. That's my big.
Yes.
I'm a big couch co-op fan. I love. The online stuff is fun. I played a lot of PC games as well. I was big into Warcraft and Starcraft competitively for a little while. Defense of the Ancients on Warcraft, but then after a little while, I sort of weaned off of the high stakes online world and started saying, hey, this should be fun and not completely nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
I shouldn't be, having it affect my attitude and my in my emotional state, where I just tell everybody to fuck off because I lost a game of Warcraft. It got to that point at certain times. Just ask my mother.
Highly competitive games, if you are a competitive person by nature, fucking destroys you if you lose. Because I'm the same way.
And Justin would know.
I would know.
Because Justin, despite saying he's a non-social gamer, well, you know what? He's a non-social gamer, but he's competitive.
I'm very competitive.
He does not enjoy.
Exceptionally
He does not
so.
enjoy losing.
No.
Although I don't think a lot of people would enjoy losing.
Well,
but
here's
you
the thing:
enjoy losing less than the average loser.
Here's the thing, though. I don't mind losing. It's when the person that I lose to talks some shit. And I outweigh them by about 70 pounds.
That is where I come in, my friend.
So, anyways, that's basically us. That's who we are in a nutshell. That's the kind of shit you're going to hear about in this podcast. This is just to give you a flavor of what you've got in store. What other stuff did we want to talk about? Oh, the name. Talk about the name of the podcast.
Oh, that's right.
I never really played this game that much.
That's right. So the name of the podcast is after a game I played a lot. When the Sega Genesis launched, and what year, I do not know. I think we need to get better.
1994.
I think you just
made
that shit right the hell up.
I am not.
But that's fine. 1994. May or may not be the year launch of the Genesis. But it came with it launched with a game called Altered Beast. Altered Beast also came out for the Mega Drive. I think the Sega system, the Master System before that. But this was an arcade port. And at the beginning of the game, the game is hilarious, and anyone who knows about games knows about this game because it's pretty famous for a lot of its sound clips. But right at the beginning of the first level, you're like these pumped up dudes in this Greek, like Roman sort of esque level, and this little floating bald guy's head pops up, and he steals your power, and so you become like a scrawny little dude. And he says, "Welcome to your doom." And I'm doing an awful interpretation. He says, "Welcome to your doom," but it's in that 16-bit, when they first started recording voice on cartridges, and it just sounds. It's so great. I heard it so many times as I played the game so many times, and just ingrained in my mind. And that's where the name comes from. It's sort of like it's a reoccurring theme of my childhood, and it sort of represents the fun nature of what this podcast is supposed to be. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be easygoing. We don't want to we don't want to be weighed down by any sort of topic blockers. Wherever the conversation goes is wherever the conversation goes. But yeah, so that's where it comes from, and we actually have to play it. If you haven't played it, I think you played a little bit.
I played a little bit.
It's not an easy game.
It is fucking hard.
It's not an easy game.
It is.
You have to memorize where things are in that game.
Good. I love a test.
Yeah, that's good. That's right. It's like writing an exam. But yeah, so it's sort of something that keeps coming up in my mind when I think of video games, old classic video games, because we're just old classic kind of people.
Pretty classic, timeless, if you will.
Timeless.
Anyways, guys, that's who we are. That's what this podcast is about. Hopefully, it kind of gives you a flavor of what you have in store listening to us. So, signing off. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the prequel of this podcast.
Podcast. I'd like to start. Can we start a podcast, please?
Good lord.
Let's
You're just gonna start sticking me with like a fucking long
with a cattle prod, just like that's 30 minutes of getting stuck with a cattle prod.
It takes me back to my childhood. All right. Anyways, guys, listen. Thanks for listening, and to many more.
Yep. We'll see you guys.
Cheers.